You scrolled past the collapse of your country this morning, and you did not even notice. Somewhere between the coffee and the commute, your phone served you a headline about the Treasury declaring the government insolvent, and you swiped it away. It served you a story about 105,000 overdose deaths last year, and you kept scrolling. It showed you an 87-year-old veteran living in a storage unit, and you felt something for maybe 3 seconds, and then a recipe video started auto-playing, and the feeling was gone. And tonight, when you are lying in bed at 1 a.m. with your phone 3 inches from your face, doom-scrolling through the wreckage of a country that is coming apart in front of your eyes, you are going to feel that thing again, that heaviness, that dread. That voice in the back of your head that keeps whispering something is really, really wrong. And then you are going to close the app and go to sleep and wake up tomorrow and do the exact same thing. That is the collapse, not the debt, not the war. Not the crumbling bridges or the poisoned water or the 700,000 missing babies or the dollar losing its grip or the $4.6 billion locked behind gates on Wall Street. Those are symptoms. The collapse is you. The collapse is me. The collapse is 330 million people who can see what is happening and have lost the ability to respond to it. Because responding has been engineered out of us. Systematically, deliberately, by the same platforms we use to watch it happen. 2 historians predicted this exact moment in 1997. They said America would pass through a great gate in history before 2025. They described the economic turmoil, the political fragmentation, the war, the resolution that changes the country permanently. They were right about every single thing. 79% of Americans now agree the country is falling apart, and the country's collective response to that agreement is a scroll, a like, a comment that says, "Wow, this is so sad," and then silence. This video is about that silence. It is about why you can see everything and do nothing. It is about the machine that turned your attention into a product, and your outrage into content, and your collapse into entertainment. And it is about how to break out of it before the window closes. Because the empire is falling. You are watching it happen. And right now, today, in this video, you are going to understand why nobody cares, and then you are going to decide if you still want to be one of them. 79% of Americans agree this country is falling apart, and they have decided that scrolling past it is an acceptable response. 79%. That is the share of voters who agree with the statement America is falling apart, according to polling data published in Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is Here. Not some fringe survey from a blog. 79% of voters across every political affiliation, every age group, every income bracket looked at the state of the country and said, yes, it is falling apart. 76% worry about losing American democracy. 62% say the country is in a crisis. Only 25% disagree. Measures of national happiness and national pride have fallen to record lows, and the share of Americans who say they are very proud to be American is at the lowest number ever recorded. And here is the thing that separates this video from everything else you have watched on this channel. The data is not the problem. You already know the data. I have given you videos full of data. Other creators have given you videos full of data. The problem is that 79% of the country agrees it is falling apart, and the collective response has been to watch a video about it, feel bad for 45 minutes, and then open another app. That is the collapse. Not the statistics. The response to the statistics, a Substack writer named John Hall published something last month that described this perfectly. He called it managed collapse. He said flights are grounded, ATMs are glitching, 911 goes down statewide. Your internet cuts out for a few minutes, and you are not too inconvenienced because this is normal. This is just what happens now. He said these are not bugs. They are symptoms of brittle infrastructure, run well past its warranty. And he described the psychological mechanism that allows it to continue, crisis fatigue. Not from the scale of the disaster, but from its sheer relentlessness. When everything is so urgent, nothing feels real. Headlines blur. Outrage flares and dies within 24 hours. Bank outages, cyber attacks, food recalls, floods, fires, each one scrolls by as if it is a feature of the simulation. Consume, react, forget, repeat. And the American Enterprise Institute, which is one of the most influential think tanks in Washington, published a piece headlined, 3 Ways America's World Order Could Collapse. And the author, Hal Brands, wrote something that I think is the most honest sentence anyone in Washington has produced in a decade. He said, do not think that a good thing must go on forever, or that the U.S. is immune from the dangers that brought old orders down. A worrying marker of our current moment is that America is courting all of them at once. All of them, not one risk factor, all of them, at the same time. And the Heritage Foundation's Kevin Roberts said people have lost the hope that the future for America will be brighter than its past. A retired Princeton professor said it is one crisis after another. A Berkeley scholar said there are some days I wake up and say I do not recognize this country anymore. And a writer on Substack compared the US to the USSR and argued that America is following the same adaptive cycle of collapse, specifically the release phase, where dominant actors ignore reality, double down on ideological comfort, and destroy their own scientific and institutional capacity exactly when they need it most. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Every one of those people said these things publicly. They published them, they put their names on them, professors, think tank presidents, scholars at Berkeley and Princeton and AEI, and the country's response was the same as its response to every other warning. Nothing. No change. No movement. No collective action. Just another headline that flares and dies within 24 hours. Because that is what the collapse looks like in real time. Not an event. A response pattern. And the response pattern is numbness. A viral financial report predicted that AI will cause a full-scale economic crisis by 2028, and within 72 hours the stock market crashed, and then everyone forgot about it. In late February 2026, a macroeconomic research firm called Treasury Research published a report titled The 2028 Artificial Intelligence Crisis. Within days, it had millions of views. The New York Times covered it. The Wall Street Journal covered it. The S&P 500 dropped in a single session directly linked to the report's viral spread. IBM and Datadog saw immediate sell-offs. Consumer staples stocks like Kroger and Clorox saw immediate gains because investors interpreted the report as a signal that white-collar job losses from AI would devastate consumer spending while basic necessities would hold. The report's thesis was straightforward and terrifying. AI is advancing faster than the labor market can adapt. High-earning white-collar professionals, the people who carry mortgages, who fund 401ks, who drive consumer spending, are going to be displaced in massive numbers over the next 2 to 3 years. When they lose their income, they default on mortgages. When mortgages default at scale, housing prices crater. When housing craters, the banks that hold mortgage-backed securities take losses. When banks take losses, credit tightens. When credit tightens, the entire economy contracts. It is 2008 replayed through AI instead of subprime, and a software QA manager with 30 years of experience in the reference footage confirmed exactly what the Treasury report described. He said for the first time in his career, he is scared. He does not code anymore. He does not analyze bug tickets. He does not create test cases. He just prompts an AI, and it does everything from start to finish. His job has not been eliminated yet. His job has been hollowed out. He is still employed, but his skill set is no longer necessary. He is a placeholder, and Microsoft executives told their own employees in internal meetings that within 3 to 5 years, most of them will not have jobs. A man who was laid off from a corporate position paying $200,000 a year described the 4 stages of AI and said the stage that exists right now, agentic AI, is the one taking most people's jobs. He said the next stage, artificial general intelligence, already exists but is not available to the public, and the stage after that, superintelligence, is being debated, but he personally believes it already exists in closed environments. He said the elite class does not want the middle class creeping up. Their plan is to eliminate the middle class entirely and create 2 classes, rich and poor, with AI handling everything in between. Now here is the part that connects this to the nobody cares argument. The Treasury report crashed the stock market. The New York Times wrote about it. The Wall Street Journal wrote about it. Wikipedia now has an entire page dedicated to it titled The 2028 Artificial Intelligence Crisis. And then what happened? Nothing. Within a week, the news cycle moved on. People went back to scrolling. The market partially recovered, and the structural threat that the report identified, mass white-collar displacement, leading to mortgage defaults, leading to financial crisis, was not addressed by a single piece of legislation, a single regulatory action, or a single policy proposal from either party. The report described a crisis that could be worse than 2008. It went viral, it moved markets, and then it was forgotten, because that is what happens now. A crisis is identified. It trends for 72 hours, and then it is replaced by the next crisis, and the next one, and the next one, until the original crisis actually arrives and everyone acts surprised. That is not a country that is managing risk. That is a country that has been overwhelmed by so many simultaneous threats that it has lost the capacity to respond to any of them. And the AI displacement crisis is not theoretical. It is happening right now. Amazon laid off 16,000 workers. Meta cut 8,000. UPS is cutting 30,000. Cisco cut 4,000. CBS News Radio shut down after 99 years, and every single one of those companies cited AI or efficiency restructuring as the reason. The Citrini report is not a prediction about 2028. It is a description of 2026 that most people are too numb to recognize. People are dying on the sidewalk in Philadelphia, and pedestrians are stepping over their bodies to get to the subway in the country. Decided this is just what cities look like now. Kensington Avenue in Philadelphia is now called the largest open-air drug market in the United States. Not by activists, not by documentary filmmakers, by the city itself, by the DEA, by researchers who study it the way epidemiologists study disease outbreaks. And what is happening there is not a drug problem. It is a civilizational surrender. People are injecting fentanyl in broad daylight on the sidewalk. They are collapsing unconscious against buildings, on bus benches, in the middle of intersections. They are found dead in alleys at a rate of 12 per day across Pennsylvania, according to the state's own overdose data. Their skin is rotting from a flesh-eating compound called xylazine that is mixed into the fentanyl supply and causes wounds so severe that limbs have to be amputated. And the other residents of Philadelphia, the ones who are not addicted, walk past them every single day. They step around the bodies on the way to the train. They push strollers past people who are actively overdosing. They have learned to look away. And this is not just Philadelphia. San Francisco's Tenderloin District. Los Angeles' Skid Row, where CBS News documented a new care campus that opened this spring with pop-up fruit stands next to tent encampments and open-air drug markets operating simultaneously on the same block. Portland, Seattle, San Diego, the Bronx, where the New York Post exposed dealers selling marijuana out of sidewalk tents they called drug igloos, and the dealers were back on the street one day after being busted. In every major American city, there are zones where the social contract has completely dissolved, and the response from the rest of the country is a shrug. The CDC reported over 105,000 overdose deaths in 2023. That number has continued climbing. The Joint Economic Committee documented that deaths of despair, including drug overdoses, alcohol, and suicide, are at levels not seen since World War I for alcohol-related mortality and 1938 for suicide. A Pennsylvanian was dying of an overdose every 2 hours in 2021. Nearly 80% of those involved fentanyl. And the response at the federal level has been to cut the agencies that track the data and defund the programs that were supposed to address it. The USDA terminated its food security reports. The FDA gutted its food safety division. The CDC had its budget cut. And now the SNAP program that feeds 40 million Americans has been slashed. The pattern is consistent. Identify a crisis. Fail to address it. Cut the agency that measures it so the crisis becomes invisible. And then move on to the next headline. And the public has followed the government's lead. You can post a video of a man dying on a sidewalk in Kensington, and it will get 2 million views and 50,000 comments saying this is so sad, and then everybody closes the app, and nothing happens. Nobody marches. Nobody protests. Nobody demands that the people in charge do their jobs. The comment section becomes the substitute for action. The algorithm monetizes the despair and distributes it as content, and everybody consumes it, and nobody responds. That is what the nobody cares part of this title means. It does not mean people do not feel anything. It means feeling has replaced doing. Empathy has replaced action. And the distance between watching someone die on your screen and watching someone die on the sidewalk has collapsed to zero, because in both cases the response is exactly the same. You look, you feel bad, and you keep walking. The country that landed on the moon now cannot launch a train that arrives on time, and the rest of the world has stopped pretending not to notice. Japan's Shinkansen bullet train system has an average annual delay of 54 seconds, not minutes, seconds. China's high-speed rail network spans over 42,000 kilometers and carries 2.5 billion passengers per year at speeds up to 350 kilometers per hour. The Shanghai maglev hits 430 kilometers per hour and runs with clockwork precision. France's TGV has been operating since 1981 and connects every major city in the country. Spain has the second largest high-speed rail network in the world. Even Morocco opened a high-speed line in 2018. And the United States of America, the country that invented the transistor, the internet, the iPhone, and put human beings on the surface of the moon, does not have a single operational high-speed rail line. Not one. Amtrak's Acela, which is marketed as high-speed, averages 84 miles per hour because the tracks it runs on were built in the 1930s and cannot handle true high-speed service. The journey from New York to Washington takes nearly 3 hours on Amtrak. On a proper high-speed line, it would take 90 minutes. California's high-speed rail project, which was approved by voters in 2008, has spent over $30 billion so far and has not carried a single passenger. The original budget was $33 billion. The current estimate is above $100 billion. The completion date has been pushed from 2020 to 2030, and most analysts believe it will never be finished. That is $30 billion spent over 18 years on a train that does not exist. And this is not just about trains. It is about the signal that the trains send to the rest of the world. Because when foreign leaders visit the United States and they land at JFK or LAX, airports that do not crack the global top 15, and they ride on crumbling highways past tent encampments and through toll plazas with broken machines, and they compare that to what they just left behind in Singapore or Seoul or Dubai or Shanghai, they do not think superpower, they think decline, and they are right. The IMD World Competitiveness Rankings show the United States falling behind Switzerland, Denmark, and Sweden in infrastructure quality. CSIS called American infrastructure a national security threat. The ASCE gave it a C- with 9 categories in the D range. The country has a $3.7 trillion infrastructure funding gap. The Highway Trust Fund runs dry by 2028, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the largest federal infrastructure bill in history, expires in 2026 with no replacement. And here is the nobody cares dimension. Americans have simply accepted this. They have accepted that the roads will have potholes, that the bridges will be structurally deficient, that the train will be late, that the airport will be outdated, that the internet will be slower and more expensive than what people get in Estonia. They have adjusted their expectations downward so gradually that they no longer remember what a functioning system looks like, and the rest of the world has noticed. A Deutsche Welle documentary released in 2026 was titled America is Falling Apart, and it documented infrastructure failures, homelessness, and urban decay across U.S. cities with the same anthropological tone that Western media used to use when covering developing countries. The camera angles, the narration, the shocked interviews with locals. The United States is now being filmed by European documentarians, the way the United States used to film the Third World. And nobody in America is offended by it because nobody in America has watched it, because the algorithm did not serve it, and the news did not cover it, and the country that used to care about being the best at everything has quietly accepted being mediocre at the things that matter most. That acceptance is the collapse, not the pothole. The acceptance of the pothole. The government published its own financial autopsy last week and declared itself insolvent, and the story was off the front page in 12 hours. Fortune magazine published the headline, "The Treasury just declared the U.S. insolvent." The media missed it, and that headline was accurate. The United States Treasury Department released its consolidated financial statements for fiscal year 2025, and the numbers show $6.06 trillion in total assets against $47.78 trillion in total liabilities. A negative net position of $41.72 trillion that deteriorated by $2.07 trillion in a single year. The off-balance sheet obligations for Social Security and Medicare surged by $10.1 trillion in 1 year, from $78.3 trillion to $88.4 trillion. Combined total obligations now exceed $136 trillion, roughly 5 times the entire GDP of the United States. And here is the nobody cares part. That story was published, it appeared on Fortune's website, a few financial accounts shared it on social media, and within 12 hours it was buried under the next cycle of headlines. No congressional hearing, no emergency session, no presidential address, no front page above the fold treatment in the New York Times or the Washington Post. The United States government told the public in its own accounting documents that it is insolvent. And the country's response was the same as its response to Kensington and the Citrini report and the crumbling bridges and the contaminated water. Next, and this is not the only financial disclosure that was ignored. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget published a paper in January 2026 asking what a fiscal crisis would look like and warning that with debt at 100% of GDP, the country has less fiscal space than at any time in history. 2 months later, the war started. $1 billion a day stacked on top of a $1.9 trillion deficit. And CRFB's warning was not referenced in a single major policy debate. The Peter G. Peterson Foundation has been warning for years that interest costs are crowding out every productive investment in the country's future. Interest now exceeds the defense budget at over $1 trillion a year. Niall Ferguson's law says an empire enters terminal decline when debt service exceeds military spending. The US crossed that threshold in 2024, and the story was covered by exactly the kind of niche financial publications that your average American never reads. National security leaders across 8 presidential administrations have said the same thing. Long-term debt is the single greatest threat to our national security. And here is the part that makes this uniquely terrifying. It is not that the information is hidden. It is public. The Treasury published it. The CBO publishes its projections every quarter. The CRFB publishes papers with titles so alarming they read like horror novels. Every single piece of data I have told you in this video is available to anyone with an internet connection and 20 minutes of curiosity. And nobody reads it. Nobody shares it. The government declared itself insolvent, and the American public treated it with the same attention it gives a weather report for a city it does not live in. That is the most dangerous indicator in this entire video, because a democracy can survive bad leadership. It can survive corruption. It can survive inequality. It can even survive war. What a democracy cannot survive is a population that has stopped paying attention, a population that has outsourced its civic responsibility to an algorithm that prioritizes engagement over information. A population that consumes crisis-like entertainment and responds to emergencies with the same dopamine cycle it uses for cooking videos and cat compilations. When the Treasury publishes an insolvency declaration and the median American does not know it happened, the collapse is not approaching. The collapse has been normalized, and that normalization is more dangerous than the insolvency itself, because insolvency can theoretically be fixed. Normalization cannot. You cannot fix a problem that people have decided is not a problem. And $136 trillion in obligations, backed by a population that does not know, does not care, and would not change its behavior even if it did know. That is the quietest and most devastating form of collapse that an empire can experience. And you are watching it happen right now. 700,000 fewer babies were born last year than in 2007. And a country that stops having children is a country that has decided it does not have a future worth building. The CDC released the numbers in April 2026, and NPR led with this. The fertility rate in the United States has fallen to the lowest level ever recorded, 1.599 children per woman, below 1.6. The replacement rate, the number needed for a population to sustain itself without immigration, is 2.1. America is now 25% below replacement and falling. 700,000 fewer babies were born in 2024 compared to the peak in 2007. That is not a gradual shift, that is a 23% decline in less than 2 decades. And the drop has accelerated since the 2008 financial crisis and has not reversed despite a brief pandemic uptick. In the 1960s, the fertility rate was 3.5. By the mid-1970s, it had fallen to 1.7. It climbed back to 2.1 by 2007. And then it collapsed again, and this time it is not coming back. And here is the part that connects this directly to the nobody cares argument, and the collapse argument at the same time. When a country's young people stop having children, it is not a lifestyle trend. It is a verdict. It is millions of individual decisions that collectively say this country is not a place where I believe I can raise a family. Johns Hopkins researchers said it explicitly. The economy, job insecurity, housing insecurity, the cost of childcare, these are all rapidly increasing and people are feeling uncertain about their future and their ability to support a child. Stat published a piece last month noting that childcare is unaffordable, housing is out of reach, healthcare is precarious, and paid parental leave is still not guaranteed. The Independent Institute confirmed that annual births dropped from 4.3 million to 3.6 million and that the decline accelerated after the 2008 crisis. And Red State published a piece literally yesterday, May 21, 2026, documenting that birth rates are declining worldwide, even in Africa, and that the global replacement rate threshold is being breached simultaneously across every major region for the first time in recorded history. And here is what nobody in Washington wants to acknowledge. A declining birth rate is not just a demographic statistic. It is a slow-motion economic death sentence. Social Security is funded by current workers paying for current retirees. Fewer babies today means fewer workers in 20 years, means less revenue into the trust fund, means insolvency arrives faster. The CBO already projects insolvency by fiscal year 2032. Every year below replacement rate pulls that date closer. Medicare operates on the same math. The tax base shrinks. The dependency ratio rises. Fewer workers supporting more retirees means each worker carries a heavier burden, which means higher taxes or lower benefits or both. And the housing market that everyone is praying will become affordable depends on population growth to sustain demand. When population growth slows, housing demand eventually plateaus and then contracts, which destroys the home equity that 65% of American household wealth is built on. The entire American economic model is predicated on growth. Growth in population, growth in productivity, growth in consumption. And the fertility data is telling you that the first pillar of that model, population growth, has broken. Not in theory, not someday, now, and nobody cares. The story was on NPR for one cycle. PBS did a classroom lesson about it, and then the country moved on to the next headline, 700,000 fewer babies per year, and the response was a proposed baby bonus and an IVF executive order. That is not a response to a civilizational crisis. That is a press release. And a country where young people have collectively decided that the future is not worth populating is a country that is already collapsing. You do not need to wait for the economic consequences. The decision itself is the data point. The most honest poll ever conducted is not a survey. It is a birth certificate that was never filed. Every breaking news alert you see is forgotten in 48 hours, and the country has developed an immune system that neutralizes crises before they can produce a response. Think about the last month of your life. Just the last 30 days. How many breaking news alerts hit your phone? How many of them do you remember right now? How many of them changed anything you did? Because I have been tracking this and the pattern is so consistent, it is almost mechanical. A crisis appears. It is covered for 24 to 72 hours. Social media amplifies it. The comment sections fill with outrage. People share their takes. The algorithm rewards the most emotional reactions. And then a new crisis appears, and the first one vanishes from the public consciousness as completely as if it had never happened. The Treasury declared insolvency. Gone in 12 hours. The Citrini AI report crashed the stock market. Gone in a week. The fertility rate hit an all-time low. Gone in 2 days. Spirit Airlines shut down permanently. Gone in 3 days. 92,000 jobs lost in February. Gone before the weekend. The Fed's fourth largest emergency injection since COVID never even reached the front page. And the mechanism that produces this pattern is not accidental. It is structural. The media ecosystem that Americans consume information through is designed to optimize for engagement, not comprehension. Every platform, every news app, every social media algorithm is built to capture your attention for the next 30 seconds, not to help you understand the implications of a story over the next 30 months. And the result is a population that is extraordinarily well informed in the moment and completely amnesic by the following week. You could quiz the average American on what the biggest news story was 3 weeks ago, and they could not tell you. Not because they are unintelligent, because the delivery system is designed to replace information as fast as it delivers it. Consume, react, forget, repeat, and this creates a phenomenon that is genuinely new in human history. A population that knows about its own collapse in real time and cannot sustain attention long enough to respond to it. Previous civilizations that collapsed did so in part because the information about the decline was not available to the general population. The citizens of Rome did not have data. They could not see the aqueducts failing across the empire simultaneously. They experienced their local decline without the context of the systemic one. Americans in 2026 have the opposite problem. They have all the data. Every number I have cited in this video is publicly available. The Treasury statements, the CBO projections, the ACE report cards, the fertility data, the banking stress data, the military recruitment failures, the water contamination, the trade deficit, the bankruptcy filings. All of it is one Google search away, and the country processes it the same way it processes a celebrity breakup or a sports trade, as content, as something to react to in the moment and discard by morning. And that is the most perfectly engineered collapse mechanism in history. Not censorship, which creates resistance. Not propaganda, which creates distrust. Saturation. Drown the population in so much crisis that no single crisis can sustain enough attention to produce collective action. Not because the crises are not real. Because there are too many of them happening at the same time, and the human nervous system was not built for rolling catastrophe. The algorithms were, your attention span was not designed for this. The platforms were, and the gap between what the platforms can process and what your brain can hold is the space where the collapse happens uncontested, because you saw it, you felt it, and then you forgot it. And the thing you forgot is still happening. The rest of the world has already written off the United States, and they are building systems that do not include you, and the transition is happening right now in front of your face. While you were scrolling past the Treasury insolvency headline and the fertility rate collapse and the military recruitment crisis and the 92,000 jobs lost and the banking system on emergency life support, the rest of the world was doing something. They were building. And what they are building does not include the United States. China's cross-border interbank payment system, CTIS, now connects 194 direct participants and 1,597 indirect participants across 117 countries. Its annual transaction volume reached $25 trillion in 2025, growing 43% year over year. That is a financial system designed to process international transactions without passing through American banks. Every time a transaction runs through CTIS instead of SWIFT, which is the US-dominated global payment system, a tiny piece of American financial infrastructure becomes less relevant. And there are now $25 trillion worth of those transactions every year. The BRICS bloc, which started as an acronym and a joke on Wall Street, now includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia. It represents more than 45% of the global population and more than 35% of global GDP on a purchasing power parity basis. And the members are actively building an alternative financial architecture. The Egyptian Bridge cross-border settlement platform is designed to allow central banks to settle transactions in their own currencies without converting to dollars. Iran is charging yuan-denominated transit tolls at the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway that used to guarantee American energy dominance. Central banks purchased over 1,100 tons of gold in 2024 and 863 tons in 2025, systematically diversifying away from the dollar. The IMF confirmed the dollar's share of global reserves fell to 56.9%, the lowest since 1995. And here is the part that nobody is telling you. The transition from American dominance to a multipolar world is not a future possibility. It is a current process. It is happening right now, in real time, measurably, and the United States is responding to it by launching a billion-dollar-a-day war that is accelerating the very de-dollarization it should be trying to prevent. The American Enterprise Institute published a piece titled "The Iran War Has Finally Shattered America's World" and dated it April 13, 2026. The AEI is not a left-wing think tank. It is the intellectual home of mainstream American conservatism. And their own headline says the world order has been shattered. They wrote that America is courting all three paths to collapse simultaneously: a sharp clash in the Pacific, a long crisis from profligacy and protectionism, and a slow slide into irrelevance from persistent erosion of rules. All three, at the same time. And the London School of Economics projected that the war will slow global GDP from 2.9% to 2.6% in 2026 and from 3.0% to 2.5% in 2027. The IMF suggested a prolonged conflict could trigger a global recession. And in that recession, the countries that have been building alternative systems, the countries with CTIS and MemBridge and gold reserves and bilateral trade agreements that bypass the dollar, those countries will weather the storm using infrastructure they built while America was arguing about the next news cycle. And the countries that depend on the American-led system, which includes the United States itself, will find that the system they depend on has been hollowed out by debt, weakened by war, and abandoned by the rest of the world because the rest of the world watched America declare itself insolvent and watched Americans scroll past the headline, and they drew the only rational conclusion. If the Americans do not care enough to save their own empire, why should we? Two historians predicted in 1997 that America would pass through a great gate in history before 2025, and everything they described is happening right now in the exact sequence they predicted. In 1997, two historians named William Strauss and Neil Howe published a book called The Fourth Turning. And what they wrote in that book nearly 30 years ago reads like someone handed them a newspaper from 2026 and asked them to describe it in advance. Their theory was simple and terrifying. American history moves in cycles of roughly 80 to 100 years, divided into 4 phases that function like seasons. Spring is the high, a post-crisis era of strong institutions and collective optimism. Summer is the awakening, a period of spiritual and cultural upheaval. Autumn is the unraveling, when institutions weaken and individualism rises. And winter is the crisis, the fourth turning, a period of existential threat that forces the total reorganization of society. And they made a specific prediction. They wrote, and I am quoting directly from the 1997 text, sometime before the year 2025, America will pass through a great gate in history, commensurate with the American Revolution, Civil War, and twin emergencies of the Great Depression and World War II. They said the risk of catastrophe would be high. They said the nation could erupt into insurrection or civil violence, crack up geographically, or succumb to authoritarian rule. They said if there is a war, it is likely to be one of maximum risk and effort. In other words, a total war. And they said every fourth turning has registered an upward ratchet in the technology of destruction and in mankind's willingness to use it. They wrote that in 1997, before 9/11s, before the 2008 crash, before COVID, before January 6th, before the Iran war. And here is the timeline they gave. The crisis catalyst would arrive around 2005. The actual catalyst was the 2008 financial crisis, close to their estimate. The climax would be due around 2020. COVID hit in 2020. The resolution would come around 2026. We are in 2026. And a detailed analysis published on Substack in April 2026, titled The Four Levers of This Fourth Turning Climax, mapped the Iran war directly onto Strauss and Howe's framework and concluded that the conflict is functioning as the resolution phase war that the theory predicted. The American Revolution, the Civil War, the Great Depression, and World War II. And now, potentially, the Iran war and the economic restructuring that follows. Each previous fourth turning lasted roughly 15 to 25 years and ended with a climax that completely transformed the nation. The country that came out of the crisis was unrecognizable from the country that went in, and Neil Howe himself, in his 2023 update, The Fourth Turning is Here, confirmed with polling data that 79% of voters believe America is falling apart, 76% worry about losing democracy, and measures of national happiness and pride have fallen to record lows. He wrote that what we see all around us, the polarization, the growing threat of civil conflict and global war, will culminate by the early 2030s in a climax that poses great danger and yet also holds great promise. And the Wall Street Journal called the book Big History and Bold Futurology. Hedgeye Research said the crisis period would extend to around 2030. And every analyst who has mapped the current moment against the framework agrees on one thing. We are in the crisis. We are approaching the climax. And the resolution, whatever it looks like, will change the country permanently. The last three resolutions produced the Constitution, the end of slavery, and the defeat of fascism. They also produced the deadliest wars in American history. And here is the nobody cares connection. Strauss and Howe's work has been read by Newt Gingrich, Al Gore, and Steve Bannon. It has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and 60 Minutes. It is one of the most widely discussed theories of American history in the last 30 years. And the theory says we are in the most dangerous phase of the most dangerous cycle in the American experiment. And the country's response is to scroll, to argue about the news of the day, to forget every crisis within 48 hours, and to treat the collapse of the empire the way it treats a weather report. The historians told you what was coming. They told you when. They told you what it would look like. And they were right. And still, nobody cares. You are the first generation in human history to watch an empire collapse in real time on a screen you hold in your hand, and the reason nobody cares is because caring has been engineered out of you. Every empire that has ever fallen fell in front of witnesses. Roman citizens watched the legions retreat. British subjects watched the colonies declare independence. Soviet citizens watched the wall come down, but none of them watched it the way you are watching it. None of them had a live feed. None of them had an algorithm serving them the collapse in 30-second clips between cooking videos and cat compilations. None of them could see every data point, every warning, every failure, every indicator, every expert screaming into the void, and still do nothing. You can. You do, every day, and that is not your fault. Let me explain why. Because the reason nobody cares is not that people are stupid or lazy or morally bankrupt. The reason is that the capacity to care has been systematically eroded by the same systems that are collapsing. Your attention span has been shredded by platforms designed to fragment it. The average American now checks their phone 144 times a day. The average time spent on a single piece of content is under 8 seconds. Your nervous system is in a state of chronic low-grade activation from the constant stream of crisis content that your phone delivers directly to your amygdala every time you unlock the screen. The Surgeon General declared loneliness an epidemic and said the health impact is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 90% of the country says it is in a mental health crisis. 76% of workers report burnout. Only 29% describe their mental health as excellent, the lowest ever recorded. You are not apathetic. You are depleted. There is a difference, and the depletion is not accidental. It is the product of an economy that extracts every ounce of your energy through work, commute, bills, debt, side hustles, and caregiving, and then delivers the collapse of your country to you as entertainment on the device you use to decompress. You do not have the capacity to care because you have been drained of the capacity to care. And the systems that drained you are the same systems that need you to not care in order to continue operating. Congress needs you to not pay attention to the $1 trillion in interest payments and the $136 trillion in obligations. The healthcare industry needs you to not notice that insured patients pay more than uninsured patients. The defense industry needs you to not connect the $886 billion budget to the crumbling bridges and the contaminated water. The financial system needs you to not understand that $4.6 billion is locked behind redemption gates. The algorithm needs you to forget the Treasury insolvency in 12 hours so it can serve you the next crisis and capture the next 30 seconds of your attention. Your inability to respond to what is happening is not a bug in the system. It is the system's most important feature, and breaking that feature is the only thing that can change what is coming. So here is what I want you to do. Not because I think one video can save a country, but because I believe that awareness is the first crack in the wall that has been built between you and your own agency. First, stop consuming collapse as entertainment. If this video made you feel something, do not just scroll to the next one. Sit with it. Write down what you felt. Tell someone. The algorithm wants you to consume and move on. Refuse. Second, do the things that are within your control. Build your emergency fund. Eliminate your high-interest debt. Stock your pantry. Know your neighbors. Build local community. These are not dramatic actions. They are the quiet infrastructure of personal resilience that every person who survived every past crisis built before the storm arrived. Third, pay attention to what is being cut, not what is being said. The budget is the truth. The speeches are the performance. When the government cuts food security tracking and infant formula, scientists and consumer protection, and public health while increasing the defense budget by 50%, that tells you what they are planning for, and it is not your well-being. And fourth, share this video, not because I want views, because the most dangerous thing about this collapse is that it is happening in silence, in the space between headlines, in the gap between the crisis and the scroll. And the only way to break that silence is for people to start talking about what they are seeing, not reacting, not commenting, talking to each other, face to face, in their kitchens and their living rooms and their neighborhoods. Because empires do not fall because of debt or war or infrastructure or inequality. Empires fall because the people inside them stop believing they can do anything about it. And I refuse to believe that. I refuse to accept that 330 million people, the descendants of people who built this country from nothing, who fought a revolution and a civil war and 2 world wars and landed on the moon, I refuse to believe those people are incapable of caring. They are not incapable, they are exhausted, and exhaustion is temporary. But collapse, if it is allowed to continue unchallenged, is permanent, so care. Even when it is hard, especially when it is hard, because the empire is collapsing in real time, and you are watching. And the only question left is whether watching is all you do.